Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias.
I know this is going to sound crazy. This is actually part two of a two-part video, and part two is going to air first. What I had planned to do is do a almost live on my United States Air Force knives. And the reason I wanted to go through this is because Williams Knife Life just recently did a video on his Ontario 499. And that really inspired me to get off my duff and show a couple of the Air Force knives that I've been meaning to talk about, but just have never gotten around to talking about. Now, if you have not seen Williams Knife Life's videos on his Ontario Air Force survival knife, I suggest you run over there and watch both of them. And I will also mention that many of the knives that you're going to see in this video, I have already done videos on in the past, probably about 2 or 3 years ago, though. So you may have seen these videos before. Also, as I mentioned, this is part two. Part one turned into about a 34-minute ramble about things other than the Air Force survival knives. I will air that later. I think the what I was covering in the ramble was also pretty interesting, but it had nothing to do with these knives. So I've edited out from this video, and it will be its own video, which will air in the near future. And finally, I do not have a slideshow with this, so I'm not giving you the exact specifications on any of these knives at at the end of this video. But what I will do is I will, in the near future, create a slideshow that gives the specifications on all of the knives that you see here, and a few other Air Force knives that I have. And with that said, let's get moving.
Okay, now I'm doing this video because, Williams Knife Life just did a video on the Ontario 499 Air Force survival knife and did a really good video on it too. If you haven't seen it, you should go check it out. It's really good. He actually did two of them. One of them he did a little bit of he did his hobo armor test on it, which was always fun to watch. I think he held back a bit. I think the knife could have done a whole lot more damage to that hobo armor. But part of the problem is if you're holding the can and you're stabbing, you're worried that that can's going to slip subconsciously at least. So what I usually do when I do the hobo armor test, or when I'm trying to jam into a metal can or something like that, I put it up against a backdrop with a piece of foam between the can and the wall, so that when I'm poking, there is a little bit of give, but the can will move. But I don't have to worry about my hand getting in the way or the knife slipping or anything else, because, well, the worst that's going to happen is the can might slip, but I'm just going to be poking forward. And I can give a full poke like I'm trying to get all the way through the can. When Williams is doing it, he's going to give when he hits that can and his hand feels that can moving a little bit. I think he's going to give a little bit, because the can's moving and it's like you stop. So there's no true follow through where you're just trying to poke in as far and as deep as you can. So something to think about with that. I might be wrong. He might be not worried at all, because Williams has been known to do some crazy things with knives. So maybe he's not too worried about it. But I know inside of me, I would be thinking twice: is that can going to slip? Am I going to cut my hand? And I have a lot more confidence when the can is basically positioned in a way that it cannot move. It's immobile. And even if it does move, if I'm giving it a full thrust, I probably will not get hurt. I'm less likely to get hurt. So I can go and just go hog wild and jam that knife in as hard as I can and see where it goes into the can. I don't do as many knife tests as William does, so he might be better off doing it the way he's doing it. But that's what I would do. I would get it up against the wall, put a piece of foam rubber between the can and the thing, and just go hog wild and give it as good a jab as you can. And I bet you're going to go deeper with those knives, especially something like the Air Force survival knife, which is meant to stab. That was one of the requirements of the knife. It was supposed to be able to stab. What we have here is one of those metal popcorn tins that come around Christmas time. That's going to simulate the side of an aircraft, I guess. Okay, I will be using my Ontario knife from 2008. You see it here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to jam it into the bottom of the can. I believe it went into the can with no problem. Let's back out. You can see the blade there. No damage to the tip. No problems whatsoever. It went right into that can with no problem. Okay, next step. What we now have is a piece of leather, not a very thick piece, but a piece of leather that I'm placing over the can, and I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to jam the knife through the leather into the can. Let's see how well it does. Gotta make sure I know where I'm hitting. Okay, let's go in close. Again, all the way through the leather, all the way into the can, all the way up to the hilt. So, as you can see, if you want to puncture with this, you definitely can. And again, no damage to the blade whatsoever. So, a very capable knife that can definitely penetrate more hobo armor than at first glance. Now, with that said, let's get started looking at these knives. And like I said, or maybe I haven't said it, but I should have said it. I've done videos on most of these knives already, especially the ones going all the way back to when the United States Air Force was part of the Army, when it was the United States Army Air Force back in World War II. And there were two different knives, two different fixed blades at least, that were given to Air Force personnel in their survival gear, in their bailout kits. And I've got two of them, two that were definitely issued. And you can see there's definitely a distinct difference between the two. This one is by PAL, and this is the RH-36. This was used by both the Navy and the Army for aircrew. And it's got a 6-inch blade, and it's a relatively big knife. And the other knife I have here is by Camillus. I forget off the top of my head what the number was given to this, but this was another knife that was issued to air crews. Both of these also came with a left-handed sheath. I don't have any of the sheaths with me right now, but both of these came with left-handed sheaths, which was not uncommon. See here, Camillus. This one, PAL. And these are knives that were used during World War II by aircrew. Leather, stacked leather handles, and the blades, as you can tell, are basically just hunting knives, and that's really what it was. They basically just grabbed hunting knives from the store and they issued them because they needed something, and these were the original kind of knives that were used by aircrew in their survival gear. Basically just a hunting knife. Aluminum pommels. This one has a brass guard, this one has a steel guard, this one, but these were the knives that were used in World War II. And you can see, let's take a look. Do you see a little commonality between them? I think there is a little bit of commonality between them, especially when you see the 5-inch blade there. See that? You just got your basic clip blade, and notice the very large fuller on the knife, and that is actually so you can actually hold the knife with your hand and do scraping and such. And the same thing with the fuller on these knives. You can actually hold the fuller You can get your thumb in there, you can get your fingers in there and hold the blade very securely. That is part of the reason the fuller is so large and wide on these knives, because it is so you can grab onto the blade. But these were the knives from World War II. 5-inch blade, 6-inch blade, both of them were used. And after World War II, Curtis LeMay, General Curtis LeMay, in charge of SAC, decided he needed a knife for SAC crews in their survival gear, and he needed a knife that was going to work, because these guys are flying over the Arctic, and they're going to be basically, if they're bailing out, they're probably going to be bailing out in Siberia. It's cold and everything else. They're looking at all sorts of cold weather gear and everything else, and he was looking for a knife for those crews, the SAC crews, the Strategic Air Command specifically. The other crews in the Air Force, you know, in 1947's Air Force, they were still using these knives. The Air Force crews were still using these types of knives, all sorts of varieties of hunting knives, all the way through the Korean War. The crews that were not using it was the Strategic Air Command. But Curtis LeMay, when he went for a knife, he actually said he wanted something like the Finnish Puukko, because he was looking for a knife that they could use for skinning, fishing, things of that nature. It was not supposed to be a knife to fight with. It was a knife designed for survival, and they had all sorts of other survival gear in there. They had the folding machete, they had a folding saw, but they needed a knife, and that's why he came up with this, because it was a nice, small, lightweight knife. You could strap it to the vest of the gear, you could strap it to a leg, you could hook it onto a belt, whatever. And it's the Bokeh 155, and this was a knife designed for SAC crews. And it was basically an off-the-shelf Bokeh. The only difference is the requirement was they wanted a lanyard hole drilled through there so that they could pass a lanyard through it and you could tie it on. So this knife started showing up with SAC crews, I think shortly after, well, whenever SAC was created. I can't remember the exact date. I'll have it down here for you. You can check out the video on this also. It gives a much more detailed history on this particular knife. But that means basically around 1954-55, somewhere around that time, the Air Force basically said, we need a new knife. We've got all these different knives out there, and none of them are really fulfilling the need that we want. And if you haven't watched William's Knife Life's video, you need to, because he went through a lot about how that contract was procured and everything else. Now, I originally thought that the Marbles knife, Marbles was the company that came up with the knife that was going to replace this knife for SAC, and these knives, and a variety of other fixed blade knives that were currently being used for the Air Force kits. Marbles came up with a design. I thought they came up with the design in '54, and but apparently the contract was submitted in '54, and however the wrangling went and everything else, finally it was around '57 or so that Marbles finally came up with the design, and that design was accepted by the U.S. Air Force. They said, this is the knife we're going to have, and here's the here's the diagram of the knife that Marbles came up with. I'll just pause for a minute or a few seconds. And Air Force said, great, perfect knife, great. And from what I understand, now I might be wrong here with the numbers, but from what I understand, the Air Force said, give us 500 of them, we need them for field testing. And Marbles filled in that 500, and they field tested the knife. And then afterwards, the Air Force requested another 5,000 for the initial order, and Marbles had another 5,000 that were given to the Air Force, and that was for more trial. And I think that second batch was somewhere around 59 or so, so 58 or so, 59, something like that. I do not know the dates. There's a lot of sketchy information out there. The one book that I want to find to read about it, I cannot find. It's somewhere down here. I'm not about to buy it again for 80 bucks. I can't afford to. But anyway, from what I understand, originally an order for 500 for testing was done. The test went really well. Marbles then was given an order for 5,000. They filled that order for 5,000. The Air Force grabbed those, and then the Air Force submitted another request for more knives. This time into, I think, like 118,000 or something like that. It was an enormous number, and they submitted the request. They said how much they wanted to pay for them, and the bids went out to different companies, and the company that was able to actually fill that request, make the 118,000 knives or something like that. It might have been 18,000, whatever it was. The number was higher than what Marbles would have been able to fill within the time limit that the Air Force was asking. Now, did the Air Force intentionally make the number higher than what Marbles could fill so that they could go with Camillus, a company that they trusted and had been using for quite some time? The Camillus had been filling U.S. military contracts for a very long time, and they knew all the strings on what to do and how to do it. Marbles had filled smaller military contracts, but nothing nearly as big as this. Camillus knew what they were doing. Marbles didn't. Camillus was trusted by the Department of Defense. Marbles not as trusted as Camillus. So did the Department of Defense stack the deck in favor of Camillus? Perhaps. But what happened was they submitted the request. Camillus won, and Marbles was stuck with several knives that ended up going onto the civilian market. And the difference between the Marbles knives and the Camillus knives were, from what I understand, the Marbles was bluing the knives, and it was all steel and everything. Camillus was parkerizing and all steel. When Marbles released the civilian version of the jet pilot knife, it was chrome and or it was bright metal and brass guards and so on and so forth. So a much better finish than you would have ever seen in an Air Force knife. But, and that is one of the other things, the Marbles knives that were submitted to the Air Force exceeded the requirement that the Air Force was really asking for, and so they were a much better knife than what Camillus needed to commit to make. And so Camillus knew how to pull the ropes. They knew how to fill that contract. And so that's why Camillus won the contract, I believe. You know, but were some strings pulled? Was there a little bit of hanky-panky going on? I have a feeling with just about any government contract going all the way back to when George Washington was first asking for Brown Bess muskets, somebody was pulling a string to make sure that their friend won the contract. Any case, let's move on. The first jet pilot knife, this is a Camillus. I do not have a Marbles. It's on my wish list, or my bucket list is to get a Marbles one, but we're talking about either 500 or 5,500 of them that actually saw service, and possibly as high as like 10,000 of the civilian versions. But this is a Camillus version of the original jet pilot knife, and you'll notice the blade is much longer. It's got a 6-inch blade. You do see the saw teeth up here. They are not nearly as aggressive. That is something I also want to mention. These are not really for cutting wood. They are really designed for cutting through plexiglass and for cutting through the soft aluminum sides on aircraft. That's really what it was designed for. You do see the finger grip there. You can grip that with no problem. You're not feeling the saw teeth up here. And the top here is sharpened. It is a full swedge. Well, it's not a swedge. It is a false edge up here. So it is sharpened. It is not dull. And you've got the leather handle, and this has the hex back, and you can see that it's peened on. There is no pin going through here. It is actually peened in there. See that? There, that works better. And For blade differences, here you go. 2 Camillus knives. You can see the difference, 6 inches versus 5 inches. So 6 inches long, and it was popular, but to tell you the truth, it was more popular with people on the ground than people in the aircraft. And the main reason is because of the 6-inch blade. The blade is just too long to be comfortable when wearing it on your vest. You got it on your vest and the knife either is getting pushed up or is jabbing you in the leg. So that's why they ended up saying, great knife, hack off a couple inches. Now, from what I understand, Marvels had made knives in 1957 and 1958 for the U.S. Air Force, and then these knives were made in 59, 60, and 61. They are not dated. These do not have a date on them. They're listed here, Camillus, New York. Nothing on the side there. I unfortunately do not have the sheath for this. If I had the sheath, I would show you. But you see the stacked leather handle there. This is darkened from use. Maybe someone dyed it, I don't know, but it typically came in just your typical natural leather color. It was not dyed, but it darkens with use over time. And that is the original. That is the, well, it's not the original, it's the second original. It's an original 6-inch jet pilot knife by Camillus. Now let's move over to the 5-inch knives, because there was something that I saw on Williams Knife Life that had me scratching my head, and I think I have an answer for it. Okay, so now we're looking at a Camillus, and this is the sheath for it. This is the later sheath. This is a Camillus from 1978. You notice it's got the metal plate here. Now, earlier ones, I actually had one from, I think, either 1975 or 1976 that only had the metal plate at the very bottom here. And I mean literally at the bottom. It was on both sides, but it was just at the very bottom. And the purpose of it was so that the blade would not poke you. Later, they made the metal sheath or metal plate go all the way up to the back side here. And from what I understand, it's sheet metal. I might be wrong, it might be aluminum, but I thought it was sheet metal. And you notice it is all riveted. The earlier sheaths actually had the whole thing with a belt loop instead of the slots here. They did away with that, made it a little cheaper. But anyway, this is a Camillus knife. By this time, it's usually just referred to as the Air Force survival knife, but it was used by all services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, everyone. If you were an air crew, this was the knife that was getting issued to you. And this is one from 1978. And something of note here, the teeth are a little more aggressive here. You've got the 5-inch blade, and once again, up here, this entire area is sharp. You have a very sharp edge up here. It's a false edge, not a swedge. The difference between a swedge and a false edge is sharpened. A swedge is not sharpened. A lot of people just call this a sharpened swedge. That's fine. At least you know what you're talking about. Then you got the blade down there. Nice little belly on it. You have the hexagon back here, and you notice it is still peened. It is not pinned on. It is peened through and then pounded in. See? Can we see that? Stacked leather, and it's holding up really well. You do have the holes for the spear. That has been a trademark of these knives from the beginning, the 2 holes for the spear. And like William said, it's not so you can tie this to a stick and throw it. It's so you can tie it to a stick and poke with it, so you have more range. I don't think he's planning on taking on bear with it or anything, but if you got a lot more reach if you're going after a rabbit, if you're going after fish or anything else, you know, which would be a little bit better than just trying to jump at a rabbit with the knife and get it like that. You see the rabbit coming down the trail, you got it on a stick, poke it, you might be able to get it a little easier than just with hand. Again, the knife is not really designed for fighting either. It looks like a fighting knife, but it is really designed for survival. Again, this is to get you out of the canopy. or out of the side of the aircraft. I mentioned to Williams Knife Life, we used to joke, yeah, actually what this is to do, the whole purpose they put this on here is so that you could occupy yourself trying to cut your way out of the aircraft while you wait for the plane to explode, because we're not sure just how effective it is. I have not seen any tests showing how quickly you can actually cut through a plexiglass canopy with this, but you know, better than nothing. This will work definitely as a hammer, but if you're using it as a hammer, then you're doing it like so, and you're pounding. Whack, 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 and you can definitely pound with it. You can also do it this way and slam into it, and I've actually done that with my Camillus Mark II, used the pommel of it as a hammer, but this is actually designed to be used as a hammer, and it will work. You do have a small area for the pounding though. And obviously they all come with the stone here. It seems like there was a common complaint about the stone that it always broke, and apparently the knife is hard to sharpen. I've never had an issue sharpening the knife. This was the Camillus, and you notice sharp edge up here. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because Williams Knife Life, this is a dull edge. It's dull up here. It is not sharpened, and that just, as soon as I saw that, I had to come down here and take a look at these, because mine are sharp and his isn't. And then it's like, that was the Camillus. Well, this is the Ontario. Now this is an Ontario that is from 2008. Can you see it there? Not sure. If not, you'll have to take my word for it. But it is from 708. And this edge, as you can tell, is sharp. I did not sharpen it. It came that way. You'll also see there is a little bit of difference. Over time it does evolve. You got a much longer clip on the Camillus from 78 than you do from the Ontario from 08. So 78, 88, 98, 08. 30 years later you've got a shorter clip blade. But it is still sharpened. And I'm wondering if when the ASEC was issued, if procurement of these became less, and I'm wondering if they're no longer being purchased. So I'm very curious on what year that Williams is from, because at some point in time they stopped sharpening up here. It went from a false edge to just an unsharpened swedge. And I don't know why, because this makes sense to have it sharpened. And the other thing is often these blades will be differentially treated. So you might have this area along here being at the required, I think 50 to 55, I think now it's about 55 Rockwell, but along the top you might have a lower Rockwell to give more strength to the spine. I don't know if that's the case or not, but if that were the case, then this up here might have a lower Rockwell. So keeping that swedge sharpened once you sharpen it might be a little difficult. I don't know. But anyway, they stopped sharpening up here. It went from a false edge to a unsharpened swedge at some point in time. But in 08, it was still being sharpened. Let's move on to the last of the Air Force knives I got. And I should say last of the Air Force knives I got, a little tongue-in-cheek, because this knife was not requested by the Air Force. This is actually a knife that the Army requested. The Department of Army asked Ontario to investigate ways to improve the aircrew survival knife, because they were complaining about the blade being hard to sharpen and other issues. And so they came up with all sorts of things that they wanted. And one of the things they wanted was a handle that was insulated so that you could cut through an electrical line if you needed to. That was an optional thing though, it was not required. But they did request a glass breaker on the top, something that you could break plexiglass with. And there was complaints about the sharpening stone breaking all the time, so they didn't want that anymore. And so what they came out with is this, which is the Aircrew Survival and Egress Knife, ASEK, A-S-E-K. And it's actually stamped right in there. You can see it, maybe you can see it. ASEK, A-S-E-K. Aircrew Survival and Egress Knife. The egress being getting out of the burning aircraft. And comes with a nylon sheath. It's got a plastic sleeve for the inside here. Moly compatible. This is one of the earlier ones. It's OD green. I prefer the OD green over all the camouflage stuff. Moly compatible, so you can actually put this on a belt. You can strap it into your flight vest. You can strap it on to just about anything you want. You notice it has two tie downs here. Let me snap them back up. Okay, you got two snaps on there to hold that knife into the sheath. And that is something that is required by the Department of Defense for any knife to be jump compatible. So in order for a knife to be able to be used with a parachute jumping out of an aircraft or something, you need two tie downs with it. Now, the way you do it, if you have a knife that only has one, you usually take some 100-mile-an-hour tape, which is a fancy word for green duct tape, and you tape your knife in, and then you also have a snap. This allows you to use two snaps to hold the knife in place, so when you're parachuting, the knife is not going to fall. If one snap fails, you've got a second one, so it's the fail-safe system that you have two things there to hold the knife in place. You pop it open, and you can go about business with the knife. And here's the knife. You notice now you have a full flat ground blade. You also have a serrated blade on the bottom. Part of the reason is because serrations dull slower and can cut through a lot more stuff. You still have some very aggressive teeth up on the top here, but now you have a swedge. It's not a false edge. This is not sharpened up here. You just have a swedge. But you have a nice sharp blade up in front here. So you got a half serrated blade and a half fine edge blade. See that? Maybe you can see it better over here. And you have the insulated handle that goes all the way through. The metal goes all the way through to the metal cap. Now, the problem with that is if you have your hand here, it's fine, but if you're cutting through something here, you still have electricity passing all the way through. See this also, it is made by Ontario. But in any case, the blade looks shorter than the regular blade, but it is actually a 5-inch blade also. It just looks smaller because you've got such a big oversized handle here, and the handle now is also molded to hold a certain way. So it is designed so that when you have this knife in hand, you know the cutting edge down here, and you have the saw portion up here. You still have the holes for attaching it to a spear. Now the holes are on either side, as opposed to the original version where the holes were just on the top. I'm not sure which way works better. And then the other thing with this knife, it is part of a system. This is the knife, but you have another thing that comes with it that is in the sheath up here at the top. And there's two different versions of this. I do have them both. And this is, as you see here, ASEK and whatever, blah, blah, blah. The Ontario Knife Company, PN 1403. And what you have here is you have a screwdriver tip, and the screwdriver tip can be replaced. There's a screwdriver tip, it's also a little pry, and then on the other side over here is a harness cutter. This is for cutting yourself out of your parachute. And this is something that is inside the top here, and it makes a lot of sense because you really, really do not want to be messing around with something like this when you're trying to cut yourself out of a parachute that is either dragging you under the water, which is a possibility, or pulling you across the ground, or you're stuck up in a tree and about ready to be captured. So you have here two razor blades that can be replaced again, because these things actually go into the SEER school, and they run through these quite often. So it's good that you can actually replace the stuff, because you do want to kind of practice on using this. But this is designed for cutting your parachute cords, or parachute line, your actual harness, so you can get out of the harness. This is the first version of it, and this here is a second version of it. And I think this probably cuts the parachute line better, or will cut the harness better, but it's lacking the pry. But at the same time, it has a key for an oxygen tank, so that is kind of important too. So, and also both of them have this small area on there. If you notice, the white area showing up there, here and here, that's your sharpening stone. So you still have a sharpening stone to sharpen your knife. And this is part of the ASEC system. Two different versions made. This is the Model 1. So this is the one that came out first. I'm guessing they decided maybe you don't need the oxygen tank as much, or maybe it depends on where you're at. I'm guessing that, if you're maybe if you're a Navy SEAL and you're jumping in the water, this might be something you'd want with you. Don't know. In any case, two different versions of it. I've got both of those, and I got the knife as well, the ASEC. Now, this knife came out in 2003. However, this knife, the earlier one with the leather handle, was still in service as late as 2018, I believe. They were still having this knife in place. And it's probably because, well, the Army wanted this knife, so the Army probably took the initial order, and the Air Force said, well, you know what, as our knives wear out, we will just go ahead and replace them with this. And from what I understand, this is the knife that is currently being used at the SEER school, the survival, escape, resist, and survive, evade, resist, escape. I think that's it, SEER. The SEER school. I think this is the one that you'll find at the SEER schools. You might find some of the older ones like this, but most likely not. It's probably this one at the SEER school. But the Air Force, as far as I know, basically, as these knives go bad, they're replacing them with this, but they're not, just making a just blanket swap out right away, because, well, the Air Force doesn't need to. They find this knife just fine. The Army, I believe, swapped this already out. I don't know where the Navy and the Marines are sitting with this. They might still be doing kind of what the Navy or what the Air Force is doing, and that is, as they don't need this knife anymore, as this knife wears out, they're replacing them with the ASEC. Or they might have all been replaced by now. But this one was introduced for service in 2003, and this is the one that became the replacement for this. But this actually was an Army design. It was not a knife that was requested by the Air Force, but it is a knife used by all air crew. Any case, with that said, I think I'm going to wrap things up. I've talked quite a bit. I hope you enjoyed this. I know there was a lot of rambling going on before I even got to the Air Force knives, but, well, I haven't done one of these in a long time, and I thought it'd be fun. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you again soon.
Let me take just a second to thank you once again for dropping by and spending a few minutes here at Knife Chats with the Pious. I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate any comments that you leave. So please remember to give me that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode is up and running. Thanks again for dropping by. Really do appreciate your time here.